Have you ever felt it? That prickle on the back of your neck when you're dead certain you are alone? Reese Miller thought she was escaping the chaos of her life when she pitched her tent deep in the restricted sector of the Blackwood Forest. She thought the silence was peace. She was wrong. The silence was a hunter holding its breath. While she slept, defenseless in the dark, something ancient was circling her campsite. He wasn't just watching her, he was deciding whether to kill her or claim her. This is the story of the night the Alpha King found his prey, and why he never let her leave. The rain in Washington state doesn't wash things clean, it just makes the mud deeper. Reese Miller killed the engine of her 2018 Subaru Outback, the silence of the forest rushing in to fill the sudden void where the hum of the heater had been. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, staring out at the wall of pines that seemed to swallow the headlights. She was 28, an investigative journalist for the Seattle Chronicle who had just blown the whistle on a massive pharmaceutical scandal, and currently the most hated woman in the city by powerful men in expensive suits. Her editor, David, had told her to get lost for a week until the heat died down. Go camping, he'd said, tossing a map on her desk. Somewhere with zero cell service. Don't post on Instagram. Just disappear, Reese. So she had. She drove 4 hours east to Oak Haven, a dying logging town that smelled of wet sawdust and diesel, and then kept driving until the paved roads turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to a rutted dirt track that her GPS refused to acknowledge. She stepped out of the car, her boots sinking into the damp earth. The air here was different, sharper, heavier. It smelled of pine needles and something muskier, like wet fur and ozone. She checked her phone. No service. Perfect. She popped the trunk and grabbed her North Face tent. According to the tattered map she'd bought at a gas station, she was technically trespassing. This was the Blackwood Estate, a privately owned tract of land spanning 10,000 acres that locals whispered about in the diner. Don't go past the red markers, the waitress, an elderly woman named Martha, had warned her while pouring burnt coffee. The Blackwood family doesn't take kindly to strangers, especially not Sidney Blackwood. They say he patrols those woods with dogs that look more like wolves. Reese had laughed it off. She dealt with corrupt senators and mob lawyers. A grumpy landowner didn't scare her. She hiked about a mile from her car, finding a clearing near a rushing stream. It was beautiful in a savage, untouched way. By the time she had the tent pitched and a small fire crackling, using illegal firewood she gathered nearby, night had fallen like a guillotine. She sat by the fire, nursing a tin cup of whiskey, trying to drown out the noise in her head, the threats, the legal notices, the breakup with her fiancé, Greg, who couldn't handle the intensity of her career. Here, alone, she felt small. Then the woods went silent. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was instant. The crickets stopped. The wind died. Even the stream seemed to hush. Reese froze, the cup halfway to her mouth. She was a city girl, but instinct is universal. Something was here. Snap. A twig broke. Not a small snap, but the heavy crunch of weight on wood. It came from the darkness directly behind her. Reese slowly set the cup down and reached for the bear spray she'd clipped to her belt. She stood up, turning towards the tree line, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice sounded pathetic in the vastness. "I have pepper spray and a satellite phone." The lie slipped out easily. Nothing but darkness. She backed toward her tent, unzipping the fly with trembling hands. She scrambled inside, zipping it shut as if a layer of thin nylon could protect her from whatever was out there. She lay on top of her sleeping bag, the bear spray clutched in her hand, listening. Heavy footsteps. Thump, thump, thump. They were slow, deliberate. They circled the tent. This wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. Bears shuffled. This was a prowl. A shadow fell across the tent wall, illuminated by the dying embers of her fire. It was massive, the silhouette of a head, broad, powerful, with pointed ears, pressed against the fabric, inches from her face. Reese held her breath, tears stinging her eyes. She could hear the creature breathing, a low, wet rasp, A deep rumble started in its chest, vibrating through the ground and into her bones. It wasn't a growl, it was a purr, a dark, possessive sound. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the claws to tear through. Please, God, not like this. The shadow lingered for what felt like hours. Then the nose pressed harder against the nylon, inhaling deeply, sniffing her scent. Rhys let out a whimper she couldn't suppress. The sniffing stopped. The creature exhaled a huff of hot air, and then the shadow pulled away. The footsteps retreated, fading into the forest. Rhys didn't sleep. She lay there, wide awake, terrifyingly aware that she had just survived something she couldn't explain, and terrifyingly aware that she was wrong about one thing. She wasn't alone. Morning broke with a deceptively cheerful sunlight filtering through the canopy. The terror of the night seemed almost ridiculous in the daylight, like a bad dream fueled by whiskey and paranoia. Rhys unzipped the tent, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. She crawled out, expecting to see what? Wolf prints? Bear tracks? She froze. Surrounding her tent, drawn in the dirt with terrifying precision, was a perfect circle, a line dragged by a heavy claw or a stick. It was a boundary, a mark. What on earth? She whispered, crouching down to touch the groove in the soil. You have 10 minutes to pack your Shasterisket and get off my land. The voice was a low baritone, rough like gravel tumbling down a mountainside. It didn't come from behind her, but from the other side of the stream. Rhys jumped, spinning around. Standing on a large, mossy rock, looking down at her, was a man. He was huge, easily 6'4", with shoulders that strained the fabric of his dark grey flannel shirt. He wore worn Carhartt pants tucked into heavy logger boots. His hair was black, slightly too long, falling over eyes that were startlingly, unnaturally amber. This had to be him, Sidney Blackwood. Rhys straightened her spine, engaging her journalist mode. It was her armor. Good morning to you too. I assume you're the owner. I'm the man deciding whether to call the sheriff or just let the dogs handle it, Sidney said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He projected an aura of absolute authority that made Rhys's stomach do a traitorous flip. He jumped down from the rock, clearing the stream in one effortless leap that no human of his size should be capable of. He landed silently 3 feet from her. Up close, he was devastating. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow and a jawline that looked carved from granite. But it was the smell that hit her, rain, pine, and musk, the exact scent from the creature last night. I'm Rhys Miller, she said, holding her ground, though every instinct screamed predator. I got lost. My GPS went haywire. I didn't see any signs. You passed 3 no trespassing signs, and a gate that was locked, Sidney said, stepping into her personal space. He looked down at her, his amber eyes narrowing as he inhaled slightly. His gaze dropped to her neck, where her pulse was visibly fluttering. You picked the worst place in Washington to get lost, Rhys Miller. I can leave, she said, crossing her arms. I just need to pack my gear. You have 5 minutes now, he said. He looked around her campsite, his eyes lingering on the circle in the dirt. His expression shifted, a flash of confusion, then something darker. Recognition? Did you do that? Rhys asked, pointing at the circle. Trying to scare me. Sidney looked at the circle, then back at her. The hostility in his face cracked for a split second, replaced by a strange intensity. No, he said quietly. I didn't do that. Then who did? Something that knows you're here now, Sidney said. He grabbed her arm or one on your arm. His grip was iron-hard and burning hot, even through her jacket. Leave the tent. Leave the gear. Get to your car. Now! Excuse me? That's a $600 tent. Rhys pulled her arm back. I am not leaving my equipment because you're trying to intimidate me with some Blair Witch spooky stories, Sidney growled. It was a low rumble in his chest that sounded identical to the sound from the night before. Rhys's eyes widened. Listen to me, Sidney said, leaning in, his face inches from hers. You are in the middle of a territory war. I came out here to chase off a rogue, and instead I found you sleeping like a buffet dinner in the middle of a kill zone. If I hadn't stayed and watched you all night, you wouldn't be standing here arguing with me." Rhys blinked. You watched me?" "I stood guard," he corrected, his voice rough. "Now, are you going to walk to your car, or do I have to throw you over my shoulder and carry you?" Before Rhys could answer, and she had a very biting answer prepared, a howl ripped through the air. It wasn't distant. It was close, maybe 200 yards away, and it was answered by another howl from the west, and another from the east. Sidney's face went rigid. The amber in his eyes seemed to flare. He swore loudly, a string of curses that would make a sailor blush. "Too late," he snarled. He grabbed Rhys's hand, lacing his fingers through hers with a familiarity that was shocking. "Run." "What? Why?" "Because they found your scent," Sidney said, pulling her toward the dense thicket, away from her car. "And they aren't as polite as I am." "My car is that way," she screamed, stumbling as he dragged her into the underbrush. "They're waiting by your car, Rhys," Sidney roared, looking back at her. "We have to get to the cabin. Move!" Rhys Miller had spent her life chasing stories, looking for the truth. As she sprinted through the ferns, her hand locked in the crushing grip of a man she'd met 3 minutes ago, hearing the crashing of heavy bodies in the brush behind them, she realized she had just become the story. The forest was no longer a place of beauty. It was an obstacle course designed to kill. Rhys's lungs burned as if she'd inhaled broken glass. The underbrush tore at her jeans and whipped her face, leaving stinging welts. But Sidney Blackwood didn't slow down. He moved through the chaotic terrain with fluid, terrifying grace, pulling her along like she weighed nothing. "Sidney, stop!" Rhys gasped, her boot catching on a slick root. She went down hard, her knees slamming into the mud. I can't keep this pace." Sidney stopped instantly. He didn't look winded. He wasn't even sweating. He crouched beside her, his amber eyes scanning the tree line behind them with a predator's intensity. The rain had started again, a cold, miserable drizzle that plastered Rhys's hair to her skull. "They are tracking the blood," Sidney muttered, more to himself than her. "What blood? I'm not bleeding," Rhys argued, checking her arms. "Not yours. Mine," Sidney said grimly. He turned his head, and Rhys saw it for the first time. 3 deep, jagged claw marks raking down the side of his neck, oozing dark blood onto his flannel collar. "Oh my God," Rhys whispered, her journalist brain finally catching up to the horror. "You were attacked last night? By what? A bear?" "Something like that," Sidney said, avoiding her eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ruggedized tactical knife, flipping it open. "Get up, Rhys. We have half a mile to the perimeter fence. If we cross it, we're safe. If they catch us before then—" Snap! The sound came from the left this time. Close. Sidney moved so fast he was a blur. He shoved Rhys behind him, placing his massive body between her and the brush. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the air, a sound too deep for a coyote, too aggressive for a dog. From the ferns, a grey wolf emerged. It was enormous, the size of a Great Dane, with matted fur and eyes that burned with a manic, yellow intelligence. It didn't look like a wild animal. It looked like a soldier. Rhys scrambled backward, her hand fumbling for the pepper spray she had dropped miles back. "Sidney, that's a wolf." "Stay down," Sidney commanded. His voice dropped an octave, resonating with that strange, commanding power she'd heard earlier. "Go home, Rooker. You're crossing a line you can't uncross." Rhys blinked. He was talking to it. The wolf, Rooker, snarled, baring teeth that looked like serrated daggers. It lunged. Rhys screamed. Sidney didn't use the knife. He met the beast midair, catching the wolf by the throat with his bare hand. The impact sounded like a car crash. Sidney roared, slamming the massive animal into a Douglas fir tree, with enough force to shake pine cones loose from the branches. The wolf yelped, a very human-sounding cry of pain, and scrambled for footing. Sidney didn't let up. He kicked the beast in the ribs, sending it skidding across the wet leaves. "Run, Rhys, the fence!" "Now!" Sidney bellowed, his face twisted in a feral rage that was terrifying to witness. Rhys didn't argue. She scrambled up and ran. She ran until her legs went numb, crashing through a dense thicket of blackberry bushes that tore her jacket to ribbons. Ahead, through the grey mist, she saw it. A 12-foot-high chain-link fence, topped with razor wire, stretching endlessly in both directions. She reached the heavy steel gate, grabbing the bars. Locked. "Sydney!" she screamed, looking back. Sydney was backing toward her, limp-walking slightly. The grey wolf was gone, but the woods were alive with movement. More shadows. More eyes. He reached the gate, grabbed a keypad hidden inside a metal box, and punched in a code. 1984. The heavy electric lock clanked open. He shoved her through, slammed the gate shut, and re-engaged the lock just as two more massive wolves burst from the tree line. They slammed into the chain link, their jaws snapping inches from Rhys's face. She fell back onto the gravel of a paved driveway, hyperventilating. Sydney stood on the other side of the gate, staring down the wolves. He placed a hand on the wire, leaning in. "Tell Caleb," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, "that if he sends another scout onto my land, I will mount his head on the town hall flagpole." The wolves paced, growling, but they didn't touch the fence. They seemed afraid of it. Sydney turned to Rhys. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a grey pallor. He clutched his side. Are you hurt? Am I hurt?" Rhys scrambled up, rushing to him. "You just wrestled a wolf the size of a Honda Civic. You're bleeding everywhere." "It's fine," Sydney grunted, swaying. "Just adrenaline dump." "We need a hospital," Rhys said, reaching for her pocket. "I have my phone. Wait, I lost my phone." She patted her empty pockets frantically. "Damn it." "No hospital," Sydney rasped. He leaned heavily on her, his weight immense. "My house, up the drive. Do not call the police." "Sydney, you need a doctor." "I said no," he snapped, his amber eyes flashing. "You take me to a hospital, and the people chasing us will finish the job before I even see a triage nurse. Get me to the house." Rhys looked at the man leaning on her. A stranger, a madman, a savior. She looked back at the wolves pacing behind the fence. "Fine," she said, wrapping her arm around his waist to support him. "But if you die on me, I'm writing a scathing obituary." The cabin Sydney had mentioned was a lie. It was a fortress. At the end of the long, winding driveway stood a sprawling structure of timber, stone, and glass that looked like it belonged on the cover of Architectural Digest, if the magazine had a survivalist billionaire edition. It was built into the side of the mountain, overlooking the valley. There were cameras everywhere. The windows were tinted dark. Rhys struggled to get Sydney up the front steps. He was losing consciousness, his skin burning hot to the touch, a fever that had come on in minutes. "Key, under the mat," Sydney mumbled, his head lolling. "Cliché," Rhys muttered, breathless, kicking the mat aside to find a heavy brass key. She unlocked the massive oak door and practically dragged him inside. The interior was masculine and expensive. Leather furniture, a fireplace big enough to roast a pig in, and walls lined with bookshelves. But Rhys didn't have time to admire the decor. She dumped Sydney onto the oversized leather sofa. "First aid kit?" she demanded. "Kitchen. Under the sink," Sydney groaned, clutching his side. Rhys ran to the kitchen. It was spotless, with a professional-grade wolf range and a massive island. She found a plastic tackle box marked with a red cross under the sink. It wasn't a standard kit. It was a trauma bag. Suture kits, clotting agents, scalpels. Who is this guy? She wondered as she ran back to the living room. Sydney had stripped off his flannel shirt. Rhys froze mid-step. His torso was a map of violence. Old scars, silver and jagged, crisscrossed his tanned skin. But fresh wounds from the fight were already changing. The claw marks on his neck had stopped bleeding. The skin was knitting together before her eyes, visible steam rising from the wounds. Rhys dropped the first aid kit. The plastic box hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack. Sydney opened his eyes. The amber was glowing now, luminescent in the dim light of the room. He looked at her, seeing the terror and confusion on her face. "I told you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You picked the wrong place to camp." What are you? Reese asked, her voice shaking. She backed away until her legs hit the coffee table. Humans don't heal like that. That is impossible. Sydney sat up slowly, wincing. The worst of the wound was already a pink scar. He looked exhausted, but not dying. I'm not going to hurt you, Reese. That's not an answer, Reese yelled, her investigative instincts overriding her fear. I saw you throw a 200-pound animal against a tree. I saw you heal in seconds. I'm a journalist, Sydney. I deal in facts. And the fact is, you are a biological impossibility. Sydney sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. He stood up. Reese flinched, but he just walked to a liquor cabinet and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He held one out to her. Drink, it's Macallan 18. It helps. Reese stared at the glass, then at him. She snatched it and downed the whiskey in one burn. Talk, now. Sydney took a sip, leaning against the stone fireplace. Have you ever heard of the Lycaon mutation? The what? No. Is that a disease? It's a genetic anomaly. Sydney lied smoothly, though the truth was close enough. My family has carried it for generations. Denser muscle fibers, accelerated cellular regeneration, heightened senses. It's rare, and it makes us territorial. So you're Captain America? Reese asked skeptically. And the wolves outside? Are they mutants too? Something like that, Sydney said. They want this land. My family has held the Blackwood territory for 100 years. A rival group, led by a man named Caleb Thorne, wants to force me out. They use trained animals, intimidation, whatever works. They tried to kill us, Reese countered. They tried to kill me, Sydney corrected. You were just collateral damage, which is why you can't leave. The air in the room shifted. Reese set the glass down. Excuse me? You've seen too much. You know where I live. You've seen the security measures. And more importantly, Sydney took a step toward her, his gaze dropping to her throat again. You smell like me now. I smell like mud and sweat, Sydney. To them, he pointed a finger towards the window, you smell like my pack. You smell like you belong to the Alpha of Blackwood. If you walk out that door, Caleb's men won't see a journalist. They'll see a weakness they can use to get to me. They will snatch you off the highway before you make it to the interstate. Reese felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. So I'm a prisoner? You're a guest, Sydney said, his voice dropping to that low, rumbling register that made her toes curl despite her fear. Until I deal with Caleb, you stay here. I have food. I have a guest room with a locking door. I have Starlink internet, so you can email your editor. Tell him you're extending your trip. And if I say no? Sydney walked over to her. He towered over her, radiating heat and power. He reached out, not to grab her, but to gently tuck a strand of wet hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her jawline, and a jolt of electricity sparked between them so intense that Reese gasped. Sydney froze, his eyes widening. He felt it too. The mate bond. He had suspected it last night when he found her sleeping, but touching her confirmed it. It was faint, but it was there. If you say no, Sydney whispered, looking into her eyes with a hunger he barely concealed, I'll have to tie you to a chair to keep you alive. And I really don't want to do that, Reese. Unless you're into that sort of thing. Reese's mouth fell open. You arrogant... Bang, bang, bang! The heavy brass knocker on the front door slammed against the wood, echoing like gunshots through the house. Sydney stiffened, his body shifting instantly into a combat stance. He pushed Reese behind him. Stay here, not a word. He walked to the door and threw it open. Standing on the porch, drenched in rain, was a man in a beige uniform. A sheriff's deputy star pinned to his chest. He was older, paunchy, with a smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. Sheriff Brody, Sydney said, blocking the doorway. To what do I owe the pleasure? Afternoon, Sydney, Brody said, tipping his hat. He leaned in, trying to look past Sydney's shoulder into the house. We got a call. Some hiker reported hearing screams and a vehicle abandoned down by the old logging road. A Subaru, Registered to a Miss Reese Miller. Brodie's eyes locked onto Sidney's. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? We just want to make sure the young lady is safe. Caleb is very concerned about the safety of tourists in our woods. Sidney didn't blink. Haven't seen a soul, Sheriff. You know how dangerous these woods are. I do, Brodie said, his hand resting casually on the butt of his service pistol. I surely do. Mind if I come in and take a look around? Just to be thorough. Reese, hiding behind the kitchen island, held her breath. She knew that voice. She had interviewed Sheriff Brodie 2 years ago for a piece on rural corruption. He was dirty, and if Sidney was right about Caleb, then the sheriff wasn't here to save her. He was here to collect her. Reese Miller stood in the shadows of the hallway, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She watched Sidney's back, broad, tense, a wall of muscle coiled to strike. I have a warrant, Sidney, Sheriff Brodie lied, his voice oily. He tapped a folded piece of paper against his palm. It looked like a grocery list, not a court order. Probable cause. We found her car. It looks like a struggle occurred. I'm coming in. Brodie took a step forward. Sidney growled, a low, vibrating sound that wasn't human. His fingers flexed, claws threatening to tear through the skin. If he attacked a police officer, corrupt or not, his life was over. The Blackwood estate would be seized. Caleb Thorne would win. Reese realized in that split second that Sidney couldn't fight this battle with claws. He needed a different kind of weapon. He needed a liar. She smoothed her hair, plastered a fake, sleepy smile on her face, and stepped into the light. "Sidney, honey," she called out, her voice dripping with manufactured drowsiness. She walked up behind Sidney, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her chin on his tense shoulder. "Who is it? I thought we ordered Thai food, not a visit from the police." The silence on the porch was deafening. Sidney stiffened, shocked by her touch, but he didn't pull away. He adapted instantly, his hand coming back to rest possessively on her hip. Sheriff Brodie stared at her, his jaw going slack. He looked from Reese to Sidney, his nostrils flaring as he took a deep, confused sniff. The scent of Sidney, musk, pine, and aggression, was all over her. "Miss Miller?" Brodie asked, his eyes narrowing. "You're here? Voluntarily?" "Of course I am," Reese said, stepping around Sidney to lean against the doorframe, crossing her arms. She looked every inch the annoyed girlfriend interrupted during a private moment. "I'm sorry. Is it a crime to go camping with my boyfriend without checking in with the local precinct? Sidney told me Oakhaven was nosy, but this is ridiculous." "Boyfriend?" Brodie repeated, skepticism dripping from the word. "We have reports you were camping alone, in a restricted sector." "We roleplay," Reese said deadpan, looking Brodie straight in the eye. "I hike in, he hunts me. It's a game, a private one. And frankly, Sheriff, you're killing the mood." Sidney coughed to cover a noise that might have been a laugh or a choke of surprise. Brodie's face turned a mottled shade of red. He looked at Sidney, then at Reese. He knew they were lying. He knew Caleb Thorne had sent men to kill her in the woods, but he couldn't prove it. Not with her standing here, unharmed, claiming to be Sidney's lover. "Well," Brodie said, tipping his hat back, his eyes cold and dead, "I see. My mistake. Just be careful, Miss Miller. Accidents happen in these woods. People trip, guns go off. Bears get hungry." "I feel very safe with Sidney," Reese said, her voice dropping. "He's very protective." Brodie sneered. "Have a good night, folks. Tell Caleb I said hello when you see him, Sidney." "Get off my porch, Brodie," Sidney warned, his voice like grinding stones. The sheriff turned and walked back to his cruiser. He didn't turn on the siren. He just drove away, the red taillights disappearing into the rainy gloom. Sidney slammed the door and locked the deadbolt. He leaned his forehead against the wood, exhaling a long, shaky breath. Then he turned to Reese. The amber in his eyes was blazing. "You," he said, pointing a finger at her, "are insane. We role-play? Really?" "It worked, didn't it?" Reese walked past him into the kitchen, her knees suddenly shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She poured herself another whiskey. He was going to come in. You were going to attack him. And then you'd be in a cage or a morgue. Sydney followed her. You put yourself in the crosshairs. Brody isn't just a dirty cop. He works for the Throne Pack. Now he knows exactly who you are and where you are. He already knew, Rhys snapped, slamming the glass down. Sydney, stop treating me like a damsel. I'm an investigative journalist. I know how to handle bullies. Now tell me the truth. Not the mutant story, the real story. Why does Caleb Thorne want this land so badly he's willing to kill for it? Sydney looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. He realized the mate bond hadn't just picked her for her scent. It had picked her because she had a spine of steel. Follow me, Sydney said. He led her down a hallway to a heavy steel door. He unlocked it with a thumbprint scanner. Inside was a war room. Monitors covered one wall, showing live feeds of the forest. Maps were spread across a large table. Caleb doesn't want the land for the timber, Sydney said, walking to the table and tapping a map of Sector 4, where Rhys had been camping. He wants what's underneath it. Rhys leaned in. Minerals? Gold. Lithium, Sydney said. A massive deposit, worth billions. But the deposit sits directly under the sacred grove, the breeding grounds for the local wolf population. My pack. Your pack, Rhys corrected, looking at the map. You mean the wolves I saw, the ones you protect. We are the guardians of this forest, Sydney said. My family has been for 300 years. We aren't just mutants, Rhys. We are shifters, werewolves, whatever you want to call us. We keep the balance. Caleb is an alpha from a rival pack in Montana. He doesn't care about the balance. He sold out to a mining conglomerate called Ridley Vance Corp. He promised them he could secure the land rights. Rhys's eyes widened. Ridley Vance? I investigated them last year. They're ruthless. They hire mercenaries to clear villages in South America. Exactly, Sydney said grimly. Caleb promised them the land, but he can't sell it unless I'm dead. As long as a Blackwood draws breath, the title stays with me. So he sent those wolves to kill you, Rhys whispered. And now you're here, Sydney said, stepping closer to her. The tension in the room shifted from political to personal. And because you stood up for me, because you smell like me, the bond has settled. The bond? Rhys stepped back, hitting the edge of the table. You mentioned that before. What is it? It's biological, Sydney said, his voice dropping. He placed his hands on the table on either side of her, trapping her. Shifters are rare. Finding a genetic match is nearly impossible. When we do, our biology reacts. It drives us to protect, to claim. He leaned down, his nose brushing her hair. Rhys's breath hitched. She should be terrified. He was a literal monster who could crush her skull with one hand. But she wasn't scared. She felt a pull, a magnetic, heavy heat in her belly that drew her toward him. You're saying, Rhys swallowed hard, you're saying I'm your soulmate. I'm saying, Sydney whispered, his lips hovering inches from hers, that right now, every cell in my body is screaming at me to tear this house down to keep you safe, and if Caleb touches you, I will burn this entire mountain to the ground. The lights went out. The darkness was absolute. The hum of the refrigerator died. The security monitors on the wall blinked into blackness. Get down, Sydney hissed. He didn't wait for her to comply. He grabbed Rhys and pulled her under the heavy oak table just as the living room window shattered. Crash! Glass sprayed across the floor. A canister tumbled into the room, hissing. Gas! Sydney roared. Hold your breath! He ripped his flannel shirt off, tearing it in two, and pressed the fabric over Rhys's nose and mouth. Stay low. Crawl to the kitchen. The ventilation is better there. Rhys scrambled on her hands and knees, the shards of glass cutting into her palms. Her eyes watered as the acrid white smoke filled the room. This wasn't a wolf attack. This was military. Sydney! She coughed into the shirt. I'm right here. His voice came from the dark, but it sounded different. Distortion. Guttural. A red laser dot swept across the hallway wall. Thermal scopes, Sydney growled. They can see our heat signatures. Rhys, listen to me. In the kitchen pantry, there is a trapdoor under the rug. It leads to the storm cellar. Go, now. I'm not leaving you. You can't fight them, Sydney shouted. They are mercenaries. Humans. If I fight them as a man, I die. If I fight them as a wolf, I need room. And I can't protect you while I'm ripping them apart. Go! He shoved her towards the kitchen. Rhys stumbled, coughing, her eyes burning. She saw the shadows of men moving on the porch. Tactical gear, gas masks, assault rifles. Ridley Vance didn't play around. She reached the pantry, kicking the rug aside. She found the iron ring of the trapdoor and hauled it open. She looked back. Sydney was standing in the center of the living room, illuminated by the sweep of the red laser sights. He wasn't hiding. He was stripping. He kicked off his boots. He unbuckled his belt. "Open fire!" a voice shouted from the broken window. The sound of automatic gunfire was deafening. Bullets chewed through the drywall, shattering the expensive vases, tearing into the leather sofa. But Sydney didn't fall. He roared. It began as a human scream of rage and deepened into a bone-chilling howl that shook the floorboards. Rhys watched, frozen in horror and awe, as Sydney Blackwood ceased to be a man. His bones cracked and reshaped with sickening snaps, his spine elongated. Dark fur erupted from his skin like a wave. His jaw unhinged and pushed forward, filled with teeth that were too big for a human mouth. He grew, expanding upward and outward until he was a towering 8-foot wall of muscle and rage. The gunfire didn't stop, but the bullets seemed to annoy him more than hurt him. The werewolf, the alpha, dropped to all fours and launched himself at the window. He hit the tactical team like a wrecking ball. Rhys heard screams, terrible, wet screams, the sound of metal bending, the sound of men realizing their high-tech weaponry was useless against a creature from a nightmare. "Target is hostile! Target is— ah!" Rhys dropped into the cellar and slammed the trapdoor shut. She locked it from the inside, her hands trembling so violently she could barely slide the bolt. She sat in the darkness on the cold concrete floor, listening to the war raging upstairs. The crashes, the howls, the silence that followed the screams. She turned on the flashlight on her keychain. The cellar was small, lined with canned food and water, but in the corner there was a filing cabinet. Rhys Miller was terrified. She was trapped in a basement while her werewolf lover slaughtered a hit squad upstairs. But she was still a journalist. She crawled over to the filing cabinet. It was labeled Land Deeds 1920, present. "If I'm going to die here," she whispered to herself, pulling the drawer open, "I'm going to know exactly why." She started reading, and what she found made the lithium deposit look like small potatoes. Sydney wasn't just protecting a wolf sanctuary. The documents detailed a lineage, a treaty signed in 1890 with the US government. The Blackwoods weren't just owners. They were recognized wardens of a federal containment zone, and Caleb Thorne's name was all over the recent correspondence, not as a buyer, but as a claimant. Caleb was Sydney's half-brother. The realization hit her like a punch. This wasn't just corporate greed. This was a war of succession. Caleb couldn't kill Sydney himself. It was against the pack law. So he hired humans to do it. He hired Ridley Vance to wipe out the Blackwood line so he could inherit the Alpha title by default. A heavy thud shook the ceiling above her. Then silence. Steps. Heavy, clicking steps. Claws on hard wood. They stopped directly above the trapdoor. Rhys held her breath, switching off the flashlight. She clutched a can of peaches as a pathetic weapon. Sniff. Sniff. A low whine. "Sydney?" she whispered. The trapdoor was ripped off its hinges. Splinters of wood rained down on her. A massive wolfish head appeared in the opening. Its snout was matted with blood. Its eyes were wild, dilated, and glowing amber. It bared its teeth, drool mixed with blood dripping onto the concrete. It growled at her. A sound of pure, unadulterated aggression. Rhys didn't move. She stared into the beast's eyes. "It's me," she said, her voice steady despite her terror. "It's Rhys." The wolf blinked. The aggression wavered. It whined again, tilting its head. Then behind the wolf, a new voice spoke. Smooth, cold, human. Down, boy. The wolf was kicked aside, yelping as it crashed into the kitchen cabinets. A man stepped into the opening, looking down at Rhys. He was handsome, wearing a bespoke suit that looked out of place amidst the carnage. He held a high-powered tranquilizer rifle. "Hello, Rhys," Caleb Thorne said, smiling. "I've been dying to meet the woman who made my brother forget his training. Be a dear and come out. The helicopter is waiting." Rhys Miller did not scream. She didn't beg. She stared up at Caleb, the man in the bespoke suit who held a tranquilizer rifle with the casual ease of a golfer holding a putter. Beside him, Sydney, the massive, terrifying wolf, lay panting heavily on the kitchen floor, his limbs twitching as the potent neurotoxin fought against his accelerated metabolism. "Get up, Rhys," Caleb said, gesturing with the barrel of the gun. "The chopper is burning fuel, and I have a board meeting in Tokyo tomorrow. Let's not drag this out." Rhys climbed out of the cellar, dusting off her jeans. She gripped the file folder she had found in the cabinet, tight against her chest. She looked at Sydney. The wolf's amber eyes were open, glassy, and filled with helpless rage. He let out a low, broken whine. "Don't worry about him," Caleb said, stepping over his brother's massive paw. "He's tough. He'll wake up in an hour. By then, we'll be halfway to Montana, and he'll receive a call. If he wants to see you alive again, he'll sign over the Blackwood deed and abdicate the Alpha title. Simple." "It's not simple," Rhys said, her voice surprisingly steady. She held up the file. "I know about the Treaty of 1890, Caleb. I know you can't just take the land. You need a blood heir, or you need Sydney to die without one." Caleb paused. A flicker of annoyance crossed his handsome face. "You're smarter than the usual hikers we get up here. Shame. Intelligence makes you dangerous." "It makes me prepared," Rhys bluffed. "I emailed the files while I was in the cellar. I sent photos of these deeds to my editor at the Chronicle and to the FBI's Environmental Crimes Division. If I don't check in within 2 hours, the story goes live. The illegal mining, the bribery, the sheriff, everything." It was a lie. The cellar had 0 signal, but Caleb didn't know that. Caleb's smile faltered. He glanced at his wristwatch, then at the shattered window where the rain was pouring in. "You're lying. That cellar is a Faraday cage. Sydney built it to hide during his episodes. There's no signal down there." He lunged for her, grabbing her arm. "Nice try, sweetheart." Rhys reacted on instinct. She didn't pull away. She drove the heel of her hiking boot into Caleb's instep with a sickening crunch, and as he bent forward in shock, she swung the heavy file folder, packed with 80 years of legal documents, smashing the spine of it directly into his nose. Caleb shouted, stumbling back, blood spraying from his broken nose. He dropped the tranquilizer rifle. "Sydney!" Rhys screamed, diving for the gun. "Wake up!" The sound of her voice, panicked but fierce, seemed to cut through the fog in the Alpha's brain. The massive black wolf convulsed. A tremor ran through its body. The drug was strong, but the instinct to protect a mate was stronger. It was primal. It was ancient. Sydney let out a roar that shook the light fixtures. He forced himself up on trembling legs, his claws gouging deep grooves into the hardwood floor. Caleb wiped the blood from his face, his eyes flashing a demonic red, the sign of a shifter losing control. "Poor, you stupid girl," he hissed. "You want to see a monster? Fine." Caleb didn't have time to shift fully. He partially transformed, his face elongating, teeth sharpening into needles, his fingernails lengthening into black talons. He charged at Rhys, ready to tear her throat out. Rhys raised the tranquilizer rifle. She had never fired a gun in her life. She didn't aim. She just pulled the trigger. Thwip! The dart hit Caleb in the shoulder. He didn't stop. The adrenaline of the shift burned through the drug instantly. He backhanded Rhys, sending her flying across the kitchen. She hit the granite island hard, ribs cracking, and slumped to the floor, gasping for air. Caleb loomed over her, raising a clawed hand for the killing blow. "Say goodbye, Rhys." Crunch. A blur of black fur slammed into Caleb from the side. Sidney had arrived. The fight that followed was not a martial arts movie. It was a brawl of titans. The two brothers crashed through the kitchen island, shattering granite and sending appliances flying. They rolled into the living room, a tangle of fur, claws, and teeth. Sidney was bigger, but he was drugged. Caleb was faster, vicious, fighting dirty. He bit deep into Sidney's shoulder, aiming for the jugular. Sidney howled, thrashing, slamming Caleb into the stone fireplace with enough force to crack the masonry. Reese dragged herself up. Her side was on fire. She saw the tranquilizer rifle lying near the fridge. It was empty. She needed a weapon. She saw the liquor cabinet, the high-proof whiskey, and the lighter on the counter. "Sidney, move!" she screamed. She grabbed a bottle of 151 proof rum, stuffed a dish rag into the neck, and flicked the lighter. Sidney, hearing her voice, kicked Caleb off him and scrambled backward, shaking his massive head to clear the dizziness. Caleb stood up, blood pouring from his snout, laughing. "You can't beat me, brother. I have the Ridley Corp behind me. I have an army." "You have nothing," Reese said. She threw the bottle. It smashed at Caleb's feet. The alcohol ignited instantly, turning the rug and Caleb's lower half into a fireball. Caleb shrieked, a high, human sound of terror. Fire was the one thing shifters couldn't heal from instantly. He scrambled backward, batting at the flames, crashing through the already broken window and falling out into the rain-soaked, muddy yard. Sidney didn't pursue him. The wolf looked at Reese. He was bleeding, swaying, his fur matted with drywall dust and blood. He took a step toward her and collapsed, his form shimmering and shrinking until Sidney, the man, lay naked and unconscious on the ruined floor. 3 months later. The coffee shop in downtown Seattle was buzzing. Reese sat by the window, typing on her laptop. The headline on her screen read, "Ridley Corp CEO indicted in land grab scandal. Sheriff Brody testifies in plea deal." She had written the story of the century. Well, most of it. She had left out the wolves, she had left out the claws. In her article, Sidney Blackwood was an eccentric recluse and environmentalist who had been targeted by corporate mercenaries. Caleb was a disgruntled relative who had started a fire that went wrong. The official story was that Caleb had died of his injuries in the hospital. The truth was darker. The Pack Council, a group of scary old men in suits who had visited the hospital, had handled Caleb. He was serving a life sentence in a maximum security prison specifically designed for their kind in the Alaskan tundra. "Is that the final draft?" Reese looked up. Sidney stood there, holding 2 lattes. He wore a crisp, button-down shirt and jeans, looking less like a mountain savage and more like a GQ model. The scar on his neck was gone. "It is," Reese said, taking the coffee. "My editor loves it. He thinks I'm going to win a Pulitzer." Sidney sat down opposite her. He looked at the bustling city street, then back at her. "You know, the offer still stands." "Which offer?" Reese teased. "The one where I move into a half-destroyed mansion in the woods, or the one where I become the Luna of a werewolf pack?" "Both," Sidney grinned. "The contractors finished the kitchen yesterday, and the pack, they're asking when you're coming home. They like you more than they like me. They think you're the only one who can keep me in line." Reese looked at her laptop. She looked at the city she had called home for 10 years. Then she looked at the man who had watched over her while she slept in the dark. The man who had torn the world apart to keep her safe. She felt that pull again, the magnetic heat, the bond. She closed the laptop. "I have one condition," Reese said. "Name it." "I get to drive, and we are stopping for a real tent. No more sleeping on the ground." Sidney reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, and forever. "Deal," the Alpha King said. "Let's go home." And that, my friends, is why you never ignore the no trespassing signs in the Pacific Northwest. Reese Miller went looking for a quiet weekend and ended up finding a destiny she never expected. It just goes to show that sometimes the scariest things in the dark aren't there to hurt you. They're there to protect you. I hope you enjoyed She Slept Alone in the Forest. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more supernatural romance thrillers like this one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. I post new videos every week. Let me know in the comments, would you have stayed with the Alpha, or would you have run back to the city? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.